and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And our very special guest this week is Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, back to the show, a physician advocate and public health warrior for LGBTQ and HIV treatment and prevention in New York City. And he's going to talk to us about the state of the HIV pandemic.
Because it's summertime and people are having sex, and so this is the perfect time to have him in to bring us up to date. Also, we will be talking about Attorney General Jeff Sessions going to speak to a private meeting of the Alliance Defending Freedom, a horrible right-wing legal group we've often told you about, all behind closed doors, nothing made public.
So the Human Rights Campaign has announced that it's launching an earlier than usual effort on the 2018 midterm elections.
The issue of sexual orientation discrimination as sex discrimination may be headed to the Supreme Court in what is a somewhat controversial move.
Good news from Washington State. They dodged a bullet and they're not going to be facing an anti-transgender ballot initiative this year.
Awful story from Dallas where the LGBT center in the black community was hit by arson and pretty much destroyed.
We have more horrors from Chechnya to report, but we can also report on progress in Germany, New Zealand, Malta, and Japan.
And a story that Andy's going to explain to me, because I haven't read this yet. The Vatican police have raided a drug-fueled gay sex party.
Well, sometimes you have to read the New York Post. And the L word is coming back.
We hope. We're not positive.
But now we welcome our guest, Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, who is officially the Assistant Commissioner at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's Bureau of HIV Prevention and Control. But you've been out there on HIV prevention for a long time now, and welcome back to the show.
Thanks, great to be back.
And the last time you were here, you were outside the government working for Mount Sinai Hospital and others and doing real grassroots work in bathhouses and around the community.
And taking anybody's phone call from the city on this issue. Seriously, literally.
It's true.
And
yes.
A great gadfly and a great public health worker. Now you've gone to work for the city to take on these issues officially. How's the transition?
It's been great. I mean, I think the lessons that I learned in the field are actually the ones that are helping me sort of mold what we're doing programmatically. I mean, one of the things that you brought up is I used to take the phone calls for a post-exposure prophylaxis line that I used to run. Well, so that organization, Mount Sinai, has that line, and they competed for a grant, and now it's funded by the Department of Health to do it in a sort of citywide fashion. So, like, literally the things that I learned on the street, and I always say I learned my bedside manner by going to nightclubs in New York City. I mean it. I learned to talk to everybody, and I think everyone should that's a great school. But then, that experience really molds how we strategize HIV and STI prevention.
But that's exactly what we want in people who work for the government, is people who know something and do come from the community and know what they're talking about, instead of lifelong bureaucrats who are talking nonsense.
Yeah, not to plug us, but I mean, our commissioner, Dr. Mary Bassett, is walks that walk and talks that talk. I mean, she has a history of being an activist from years and years ago, and she's still an activist, even though she's in a really prominent leadership position in the Department of Health. So, as a role model goes, that's a pretty good role model.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So let's get into the meat of this.
Great.
First of all, give us an update. What does the HIV epidemic look like in New York City, and to the extent you can go beyond that?
Sure.
Where are we right now?
So I think that we have some really great signals in terms of what's going on with the HIV epidemic in New York City. For the first time in the history of the epidemic, we are under 2,500 new diagnoses in New York City. So I think the number is 2,493. And
Annually.
That right, so from 2015. So that's the last time our data closes where we have like a complete data set. So under 2,500, which is the first time. We had a 10% drop in new HIV diagnoses among men who have sex with men, which is the first time that's ever happened, which is amazing. We also have one of probably the most poignant wins of the HIV story to date in New York City, if not the country, given the size of our epidemic. We had 0 maternal to child transmissions of HIV in 2015, so 0, which is remarkable. We've seen injection drug user numbers, or people who inject drug numbers, go way down. We used to have about 1,000 new diagnoses in 2001. Last year we had under 80.
Wow.
So everything, and there's problems though. Like there's no way around it. There's equity issues, which I think are really important to talk about. So we have a decreasing epidemic among women, mainly heterosexual transmission, but 91% of those new diagnoses are Black and Latina women. So the idea that we are improving the epidemic and we're potentially going to end it in white women, but then have this disparity among people of color is really one of the things that we're focusing on intensely.
Now, is that also true among, we've heard for years that young gay men of color, or men who have sex with men of color, Latino and Black, that the numbers are worse there?
Well, what's interesting in New York City is that that group, the numbers are starting to go down. And so now the sort of middle register and the sort of older adults are who we're seeing, stabilizing. So we are in this position where we're seeing improved numbers among youth. And we have a couple of really important things that are happening in New York State that may make that better. I'm sure some of your viewers may know that the New York State recategorized HIV as a sexually transmitted infection, which is, shocking, but from the regulatory perspective,
35 years into the known epidemic.
There you go. But from the regulatory perspective, something really important happens for youth when HIV looks like an STI, which is that all of a sudden you are allowed to consent for treatment and prevention of that STI without parental consent. So prevention and treatment, though you can get tested for HIV as young as 12, it used to be that if you were positive or you were at risk, someone else had to sign on for either treatment or prevention interventions, and now that's not the case.
So let's talk about why this is going down.
Sure.
We basically talk about getting people tested and on the drugs, and then they become less infectious or non-infectious, and then they're not going to infect other people.
Yeah.
So what's working in terms of bringing it down among these more intractable populations?
Yeah, and so I think the question is so insightful that really it's not about the populations where it's going down and has been going down for years, but it's the population where you have this more stubborn piece of the epidemic, and that really is men who have sex with men. Like, it's stubborn. It goes down a little bit, but it doesn't take that swan dive of 0 new maternal to child transmissions, like, huge decreases in people who inject drugs. So I think that really you've hit the nail on the head, which is that condom use is stable. It's not improving. It may be getting a little bit less, but it's
because of PrEP.
Maybe, probably, but it was going down before PrEP too. Okay. But the bottom line is that I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is that viral suppression is a very powerful intervention. And so as we see more and more New Yorkers getting diagnosed with HIV and getting into care rapidly and their viral loads being suppressed quickly, we're reaping that benefit of them being very healthy, mortality going down, AIDS deaths going down, and then viral transmission really ending. I mean, we're the first jurisdiction to sign on in the US to the U equals U idea, that undetectable equals untransmittable. There's a consensus statement, so New York City was the first to sign. DC just came on board last month. But people who are virally suppressed don't transmit, and we're like the biggest demonstration of that. Like, our numbers are careening down primarily because of that.
And let's slow down on this just a little bit, because we're using a little bit of phrases.
There's a little jargon there.
No. I mean, it's understandable, but our viewers need to understand.
Sure.
if you get on these drugs, if you test positive and you get on these drugs, you can go to an undetectable level of virus, and then you're not going to be transmitting.
Yeah, and the data show that. And so New York City, I think, has been really good about sort of focusing on data, not the dogma. And the data are that if you are virally suppressed, and you're durably virally suppressed, which means that you're consistently taking your medicines and that viral load is undetectable or below the limit of detection of a lab test, that those people do not transmit HIV.
Let me look at the other side
Sure.
of the coin for a minute. Everything looking good in those in the progress of this, but that's still a lot of infections every year. And
100% true.
And I have to say personally, having been aware of and worked on trying to do things about this epidemic for 35 years, I'm continually shocked about people still getting infected. I shouldn't be, I know all the factors, but it breaks my heart, it makes me angry. I don't think there is enough education. I don't think there's enough push to testing or treatment or whatever. But what's your perception of why we still have 2,500 people in New York City every year getting infected?
Yeah, so about 1,500 of those are new infections. The rest are new diagnoses. So the distinction being that some people are just finding out late, but not as late as they used to. So our average CD4 count at diagnosis is now well over 350. It used to be.
But there's somewhere in the new infection statistics along the way.
So I think that there are a lot of reasons for that. The first is that we are a very well-tested jurisdiction. The reality is people who transmit HIV are individuals who are unaware of their status for the most part. And so there's an important need to identify people and get everyone tested for HIV so we're aware of their status and can offer them interventions to keep themselves and others healthy. So that's one piece of it. I think the other piece is, the bottom line is that really HIV is driven by stigma, by poverty, and by racism.
As always.
Yeah, and so we're working in a scenario where people can't potentially be honest about their lives with medical providers or other people. Don't seek medical services where they may be offered an HIV test as a matter of routine, feel alienated by the system, feel like they can't afford it, in some scenarios now are worried about their immigration status and are worried to present for HIV testing and what that means if you enroll in programs. So I think that we're working against the same problems that we had decades ago, but the strategy of trying to remove the HIV stigma as best we can is part of our story. I mean, I'll give the example. Like, I actually tend to think that any HIV test result is good except for the one that you've never had.
Sure.
Because everything leads to something that could lead to either engagement in treatment or engagement in prevention. So we've really been trying to switch that dialogue in the city where, someone who's a funded tester and counselor for New York City is not going to look at you and start crying when your result's positive, but instead is going to say, like, so now what?
Yes, although I didn't intend to get into this right away, but there are people for whom a positive test has other implications.
Absolutely.
Criminalization, stigma, discrimination. So I think all of that remains real too.
I agree.
Okay.
I think we have to sort of force the system to change, which is why we're sort of doing a lot of work in sort of that space of trying to normalize the HIV test result no matter what direction.
But picking up on all this for everybody, you are encouraging everybody to bear it all.
Indeed.
And you personally are encouraging people to do it. I don't know if we can get a picture of you up there, but we're going to try. But we do have a video from your Bear It All program.
And then, let's describe it first before they...
So it actually is a 3-part program.
Yeah.
So Bear It All is the public-facing message, and that's what you're going to see in the video. The idea that people should be honest with their providers about their sex lives and drug use, and if they can't,
providers meaning doctors.
Medical providers mainly, but I mean
nurse practitioners.
Yeah, medical providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, PAs, people who have the ability to sort of offer interventions that may keep them healthy. So
be honest with your doctor.
Right.
Yes.
And if you can't be because you feel like they're judging you, then fire them. and let us help you find a new one.
Right.
And so that's the public face. And the back office piece of this is that we sent out surveys and have vetted over 130 providers. We've vetted more than 130, but we've identified 130 providers that we think are high quality providers of LGBTQ health related services. So if you do need to bear it all to a new provider, you don't have to struggle and find one. You can call in New York City 311 or look on our map to identify people who are vetted by NYC.
And might take my insurance.
And take your, actually, interestingly, 80% of them take Medicaid. So we were very specific in terms of who we looked at, but many of them also take a private insurance.
Okay.
So this is a 30-second public service announcement, which will air where and when?
Currently it's online, but the intention is to eventually do it on television as well at some point. But for now, it's going to be on YouTube and hosted on the New York City Department of Health YouTube page.
Maybe MNN would air it. Let's take a look at the Bear It All public service announcement.
I will be
assertive,
confident,
honest,
myself.
because no one has the right to judge me.
That includes my doctor.
So I will tell them everything.
even about my sex life.
And drug use.
I will bear it all.
Staying healthy starts with telling your doctor everything. If fear of judgment keeps you from doing so, we can help.
Can you help people in Mississippi too?
I wish. I mean, the good news is that this is sort of the burden and honor of being New York City, which is that everyone is watching what we're doing. And so there have been a lot of people in a lot of jurisdictions who have anxiously been awaiting our Fire Your Doctor campaign. Everyone is interested because I travel a lot for the CDC doing capacity building. And when I go to the South, one of the fundamental issues is that people who are seeking care don't talk about their lives, and opportunities are missed for PrEP and other preventive interventions.
I am shocked at the extent to which friends of mine are not completely honest with their doctors. I just don't understand that as a way to live at all.
Speaking of new doctors, do you have a thought about Dr. Brenda Fitzgerald, who's going to be the new head of the CDC coming out of Georgia?
Yeah, well, Georgia's rough. I don't really know that much about her personally. I understand that she did pretty remarkable things in terms of restructuring how the Department of Health works in Georgia. But I think that Georgia is one of the jurisdictions, at least from the HIV perspective, who has really had some significant challenges, including Fulton County, where they had to return several $1 million of funding because they weren't able to spend it for prevention. So I hope that that having been in a difficult jurisdiction to navigate will give her significant skills to be able to sort of navigate what is a large, difficult jurisdiction.
I want to get you two together.
Hey, that sounds like fun.
I'm more worried about other people at HHS that have gone in there who are anti-contraception and other things. All right, so aging, the HIV positive population is aging a lot in this city and facing particular issues. How do you see that, and what strikes you about?
Yeah, I think we've been doing a lot of really interesting analyses of data looking at the aging population of HIV. We have a long-term survivors data set that we've developed, which has been pretty interesting.
You did a long-term survivors awareness day.
I think it's our third one now. So we've done 3 of them, and I think we've had different focuses. The first one was on long-term survivors. The second had long-term survivors and their providers, which was really kind of fun. And then we actually did a little bit of a focus on individuals who had HIV transmitted at birth. So it's been really an interesting sort of voyage to sort of hear the survivor stories and really to appreciate that though there are medical issues that happen because of sort of the prior medicines you've taken and just HIV in general, just the significant amount of trauma that folks have lived through, and the sort of fact that really approaching individuals with more trauma-informed care is a really important strategy for survivors. And we've actually integrated that into a lot of our Ryan White programming, so we really can provide that service, because the more you hear, the more you see. The data tells us one thing, but the real stories of the people that we're hearing, it's really about having survived a war. And so they really do have all those stigmata, all those sort of stains of that experience that they have to deal with. It is 100%, it's 100% trauma trauma. It's 100% PTSD.
And there's all this unresolved stuff for people who are HIV negative as well, who've survived all this.
Absolutely.
And live with it. And by the way, we heard this week that's 10% of deaths for people who have HIV are cancer related.
Yep. I mean, for me, and I've said this a lot in the context of ending the epidemic, the work that we've been doing with the city and the state around this is that one of the things that we have to end the epidemic of HIV is really focusing on tobacco. I mean, like, bottom line is, you know, people are dying of lung disease, people are dying of cancer, and that's like, right, you know, they can be virally suppressed with CD4 counts that are fabulous, and, you know, tobacco still gets you.
I remember friends with AIDS who would sneak smokes in the hospital in the old days. No, I don't think you can get away with that now.
And HPV with anal and throat cancers.
Yep. I mean, you know, we live in a world where we have a 9-valent vaccine that prevents both wart strains as well as cancer strains. And thankfully, our numbers of HPV vaccines in New York City are soaring. Like the compliance to vaccination for youth is there. But I think we can do better. And I
don't think adults are familiar with this as an issue. And so they have unprotected sex. Maybe they're on PrEP, or maybe they're HIV negative and they don't think they need protection. And meanwhile, they're exposing themselves.
What is the data that you're seeing on STIs in New York, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we reflect the rest of the country. So our gonorrhea rates, our chlamydia rates, and our syphilis rates are increasing. And I think we're going to be releasing new data later in the summer. And so we really have this sort of consistent signal that the rates are going up. But from the LGBT perspective, there's something that's really concerning to me, which is that despite years and years of being very clear that you need to test what you use. In other words, like, if you have anal sex, you need to get your butt screened. If you have oral sex, someone needs to swab your throat. You know, you have to have a cervical test or a urine test. Whatever organs you use for sex need to be tested for gonorrhea and chlamydia. Despite that, I just think that we haven't had a lot of traction. And though that seems to just be a kind of weird doctor message, it has some really significant HIV implications. So 1 in 15 people who are diagnosed with a rectal gonorrhea or chlamydia infection in our clinic will come down with HIV within a year. 1 in 15. Wow. So that sounds like a terrible statistic, but then if you flip it to the positive, if you identify someone with rectal gonorrhea or chlamydia and say, hey, let's treat this infection, but by the way, we have something called PrEP, you can prevent that. You can prevent it. That's how you get an epidemic. So STD, the front line for us.
And PrEP, for people who don't follow it closely, is pre-exposure prophylaxis. Yep. Taking Truvada, basically, or they have a generic now, yes, so that you will not get infected with HIV if you take it consistently.
Right.
Then, of course, if you get CLAP, there's this Bacillin LA shortage that's going on.
Right, that's for syphilis.
Sole provider.
Yeah. We definitely are up against Pfizer produces Bacillin, and it's the best drug to treat syphilis. It is really the only choice of how to treat syphilis in someone who's pregnant. So we're okay in New York right now, but it's not a good scenario where we have like a bottleneck of drug availability for this infection that really, I mean, our syphilis rate, just like the rest of the country, is we are in an increasing syphilis environment, not decreasing.
And what about the drug-resistant gonorrhea?
Yeah, so thankfully we have seen like a fair amount of drug-resistant gonorrhea against azithromycin. We're not seeing a lot of drug resistance for the higher injectables, but I mean, I think we're in the same boat that the really early identification, treatment, and avoidance of gonorrhea is what we need to sort of preach.
So we're making a lot of progress.
Yeah. We have challenges though.
But we have a reactionary administration in Washington which on the table wants to cut everything.
Yeah.
And if it cuts Medicaid the way they're proposing and all those things, what is going to happen to public health?
Well, I mean, I think
not just AIDS.
Yeah, no, I think that we in general will then have to get back into the zone of being really a safety net. I mean, like I had this conversation with
New York being a safety net.
I think public health, like whatever we're doing in that universe. And so I think, just focusing just on, let's say, the department and the work that we're doing, I think that what we would have to do is really look at what our services are and make sure that our core services that are the most important are maintained and fill the gaps of what may get cut from the perspective of, Medicaid, et cetera. I mean, I think we built a lot of our strategy for how to sort of address HIV on the fact that New York State is a wonderland of coverage. So you can get assistance for PrEP. If you can't afford it, there's a way to get it. You can get, we have a fabulous ADAP program that the state runs, like amazing. We have great Ryan White Part A services to support people's sort of social needs. We have amazing housing, like all this great stuff. But it's all predicated on the fact that we're not always the safety net for everything. And so I think what will happen if we really get a lot of cuts is that you'll see public health sort of, sizing into that position of maintaining like the most core, most important services. And that's not how you really fix an epidemic. So I think that the thing that's been really great about the de Blasio, our mayor's investment in HIV is that we have these extras that allow us to push the epidemic in directions that it's never been pushed before. So the fact that we've been able to we funded like 4 grassroots trans organizations that are trans-led or trans-focused, and sometimes in some scenarios we increase their funding by 100-fold.
Now, I know you don't run the schools,
Yeah.
but they have all these requirements for AIDS education. We fought very hard to get them in there. My sense is that it's not happening,
Yeah.
AIDS education in the schools and things like that. And what can you and the health department do about that? And our kids, is our children learning?
Right. So I think that the folks from school health are, and from MERS, our maternal infant health group, really work hard on this. But I think that one of the main issues is that there's a lot of mandate for what you should do or have to do, but then it goes school by school. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done to sort of make sure that, I frankly think that there's a legislative issue more than like a regulatory Department of Health issue.
Well, they've passed all the laws,
Yeah.
they're just not doing it.
Right.
Because the state has a law,
yeah.
the city has a law, and they just don't do it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, that's yesterday, and that's over, we're on to something else.
No, I think that from our perspective, from the HIV perspective, like this is the front line. We're talking in a world where high school students will be able to get PrEP without parental consent. That also requires them to know about it. Yeah. So I think that that's definitely a very avid piece of the conversation, given that this regulatory change happened just a few months ago. So I think that your point is great. That I think that the variability is concerning, but that we're working with our colleagues in family health to try to keep pushing that agenda, because for us it's critical. When you look at our numbers, our peak for HIV is 20 to 29. That's like the age range with the most. But really, the disparity issue happens not when they're diagnosed. It happens before they're diagnosed, when they're negative.
Years ago we were working under a Department of Health grant at the Hetrick Martin Institute to go out into the schools all over the city to do AIDS education, and it worked brilliantly, I think, but we were just a few people trying to cover a lot of territory. But it made a huge difference to have people come in and have a real, honest conversation, not rely on just the health teachers or the schools that don't want to do it, but really go out there and
when I was an undergrad, I did something called Students Teaching AIDS to Students. Mm-hmm. So I remember going to these high schools all over Upper Manhattan, and it was really great to sort of have that interaction.
We need a lot of that. I also it seems to me a key point in all of this is doctor education, and really making sure that they're knowledgeable and aggressive about talking to their patients.
Well, this is one of those areas that, again, the burden and privilege of being New York, we're kind of leaders, we are leaders in strategies for provider education. So the thing that we're, I think, the most known for currently in terms of our provider education strategy is our provider detailing campaign that we did for PrEP and for sexual health. So what we did is and we're not the only ones. HIV is not the only one that does this. Other parts of the agency do as well, like for judicious opioid prescribing, all these like fabulous programs. But we engage drug reps. And we teach them how to outreach to providers the way that they're familiar with through this sort of detailing. Face-to-face, and to teach them what pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis are about. And embedded in that is a lot of conversation about sexual health. So I think the number now is approaching like 3,500 providers have been detailed by us exactly on this issue. And we've seen, at least in our surveillance, an increase in PrEP and sexual history taking among the providers that we've reached. And a lot of other jurisdictions are looking at doing something similar. I think Virginia took our kit. Parts like I think LA County took our kit. So a lot of folks are looking at it because you have to sort of use strategies that are familiar to your audience. Like I can put a poster up in a clinic and the provider's not going to read it.
No.
Patients may, but like if you want to get them, it has to be in a very familiar way, which is like someone in a dark suit shaking your hand, offering you a free pen and a pamphlet. They know what that's all about.
And what about this New York City LGBTQ healthcare Bill of Rights?
Yeah, we're really proud of that.
Yeah.
So
in our last minute or two, tell us about that.
Great. So we had the idea that we wanted to make sure that our population were aware that they had rights in the healthcare setting. We didn't create new rights. We didn't do anything ridiculous. We are living in a wonderland in New York in so many ways. So we just sort of conjured it all together and just made sure it was accurate, put it together in one document, and then got the sign-on of the Commission on Human Rights. So we have the Department of Health presents the LGBTQ Healthcare Bill of Rights, and if someone isn't taking care of you the way that we're saying, call the commission so you can file a complaint and they'll pursue it.
Presumably that's available online
It
somewhere.
is.
We will send you a link with
Yeah.
our
Perfect.
bulletin that goes out
All
this
right.
week to that and to your neutral, what is it?
The status neutral continuum.
Yes.
Yeah, it's our neutralizing HIV by caring more about what people need rather than what their status is.
We'll have a link about that too.
Amazing.
We thank you for bearing it all.
I'm really a shy
Poster
flower.
We wish to we wish to bear it together. Seriously.
But thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you.
And thanks for the update. And please, everybody pay attention and come back soon.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay.
So I want to start with Trump and the Russians, as everybody else does, because
Okay.
Donald, if you'd only listened to us when we were protesting you're having the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow, none of this would have been happening, and you would have a very successful presidency.
Oh,
now, in his
please.
meeting, of course, in his meetings
He's
with
had so much real estate business with Russia.
I know,
They've been
I know.
financing his
and in
business
his meeting
for
with
years.
Putin this week, he didn't raise the Chechen issue, but or the anti-gay stuff. With,
Thank God, he probably would have had us more killed.
But Chuck Schumer, the Democrat leader in the Senate, made a list of 11 things that Trump should raise with Putin, and Chechnya was not on the list.
I don't get why it's so hard for them to remember that. We certainly have been loud about it, but I've thought for years we were a lot more invisible than we think we are.
And as you were alluding to in the interview with Dimitri, Trump now has a domestic policy aide in the White House, Katie Talento, and a top lawyer at HHS, who were veterans of the fight to end the requirement that insurance plans cover birth control. This woman, Talento, says pregnancy is not a disease. Pregnancy is a sign of health. You don't ingest a bunch of carcinogens in order to plan your family. Well, this is the woman planning your future, women of America. So that's another reason for
This goes back many years to the feminist whose name I'll remember at 3 o'clock in the morning, who wrote the the doctor's case against the pill. The pill historically was a problem physically, but then they ameliorated those problems. They changed the formula. It's a lot safer now. But those anti-feminists are operating on the old information.
And they're
to
running the show
condemn it.
now, folks.
Well, I'm worried about Attorney General Jeff Sessions, as I have been ever since he took office and long before. But now he's gone and spoken behind closed doors to a convention of the Alliance Defending Freedom.
That's
now,
Jay Sekulo's group, isn't it?
I don't know which one he's involved with, but
Alliance
the
Defending-
Alliance Defending Freedom we've talked about for many years on this show as our chief opponents, the people who go to court to fight against marriage, fight against non-discrimination laws, fight for religious freedom exemptions.
Fight to keep bathrooms safe for,
Absolutely
et cetera.
fight against any rights for transgender people. So they held an annual conference in California, I think. And Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the United States, goes and gives a speech to this convention. No press allowed. Closed doors, not a word leaked. That's the only thing we can't get a leak from.
How is this legal?
Well, I have no idea whether it's legal or not, but it is extremely, extremely upsetting that the Attorney General of the United States would go give a private speech to such a right-wing, heinous group.
This voter suppression group that, with Chris Colbeck heading it for the White House, they are not running open meetings, transparent meetings, et cetera. And look, in the midst of all this, we're also fighting this, this Medicaid destruction bill, basically, and
at least we're talking about that.
We went to a die-in at David Koch's house on Park Avenue.
Yes.
Rise and Resist did.
Yep.
And because he is really the architect of all this, these plutocrats are the ones who are making the government do this.
It's terrible.
And then there's all those people who are cutting down on the regulations, who are basically industry lobbyists, who are just writing their own tickets. All this was supposed to be about drain the swamp. I know it's a cliche, but I mean, my God, people, things are going to be so deracinated by the time we come out of this.
To think that anyone thought that was serious, or that they weren't going to come in and do all this with all these heinous lobbyists is ridiculous.
No, he was saying he was going to do the opposite.
Oh,
and I'm just saying this is the line that people decided to swallow.
You didn't think he'd win the election either.
Didn't. I thought, hey, let me talk to you. I thought better of you out there.
All right.
I know you didn't do it.
Here's an effort to fight back. The Human Rights Campaign, about which we've had some questions over the years, but now they are starting early and hard. They are pouring $26 million into grassroots campaigns around the country to go on offense, as they say.
They're focusing on several key states where there are Senate races: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. They're expected to have competitive Senate races this fall.
And they're going to work in coalition with other groups like the NAACP and Planned Parenthood. They're going to hire 20 new people, and they're going to get more people around the country. And the idea is to get out there and start working on these 2018 campaigns right now.
Please make sure you're registered to vote for this critical election in 2018.
And that you please do go and vote. But I think this is good. I think we have to be aggressive. I was very happy to see that we've won some local races in the last few days. We won a couple of races in Oklahoma yesterday of state legislators that we flipped from Republican to Democratic seats.
While people are organizing and getting ready for the 2018 elections, we also have to do issues organizing in the states. A lot of your states don't have state LGBT rights laws. And the other thing you have to worry about is your marriage rights can be taken away. I'm just going to say it. A lot of you live in states that have laws banning same-sex marriage. They were declared unconstitutional. But Trump gets one more appointment on the Supreme Court, replacing one of our votes, and that can be overturned. And that means you have to do what Nevada did, which is overturn your bad law. You have to work on that and get that off the books. These are the things that have to happen. I think freedom to marry folded their tent too soon.
Well, they may have to reconstitute themselves. Next week, July 18th, Texas legislature goes back into special session to pass the anti-trans bathroom bill and other anti-trans bills and any other horrible thing they can think of.
Well, the leader of the House there in Texas, Joe Strauss, who's been resistant to this, he's a Republican, but he said, I don't want a suicide on my hands. He said that about these bills, so I hope that means that he's going to stop it.
Well, he can try, but he's certainly got a lot of opposition.
He's the Speaker of the House.
Yeah. Also in Texas, in Dallas, in South Dallas, there's an LGBT community center in the African American community there, which was hit by an awful arson fire.
Terrible thing.
Yeah. And, really destroyed and horrible.
Services. Yep. Yeah. It was a Friday morning. They know it was arson. They don't know if it was a hate crime yet.
Yeah. A national legislature story that I skipped over. Representative Vicky Hartzler, a Republican from Missouri, is trying to add some amendments to the Defense Department funding bills She wants to ban the Defense Department from funding any care for its transgender service members.
She wants to ban transgender service members entirely.
Completely.
I mean, they are allowed to serve now if they've come out, but there's a delay in 6 months in terms of new recruits, including people coming from the service academies who are transgender who can't serve.
But as an interim measure, until she is successful in throwing them all out of the military and barring them forever, she would like to cut off any hormone treatments, surgeries, anything else that the department is currently paying for as routine medical coverage.
The VA is still not paying for that.
Yes, exactly.
I was at the VA this week.
There's a controversial move by Lambda Legal Defense. They are going to appeal a decision in the 11th Circuit on behalf of their client, Jamika Evans. Jamika is a lesbian who was forced out of her job doing security at a local hospital. She was harassed interminably to the extent that she finally had to leave. As a lesbian, she was harassed. She was ruled against because Georgia does not have a non-discrimination law. And she appealed to the 11th Circuit, and they refused to rehear the case. So Lambda is now going to take this to the Supreme Court because the 7th Circuit ruled in favor, you may remember, of a lesbian who was forced out of a job at a college.
Right.
And
that's Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin.
The 7th Circuit ruled that the lesbian had been the subject of sex discrimination for being forced out as a lesbian.
And then our circuit here in New York also did not uphold sexual orientation discrimination as sex discrimination. So there is a division in the circuits, and when there is, the only way to resolve that is through the Supreme Court. So the controversy is, should we be going to the Supreme Court with this now? Of course, we better do it before Kennedy leaves. But transgender folks are saying, hey, we would like to get it. It's much easier to get it resolved on a national level that transgender people are covered by sex discrimination. Let's do that first.
Because if we do lose at the Supreme Court, with or without Anthony Kennedy, that is going to throw a big roadblock into trans people winning sex discrimination cases or non-trans people.
They are separate issues, though, right?
But Jamika Evans, hospital security guard, is our new poster woman for sexual orientation discrimination as sex discrimination.
Well, good news for transgender folks and all of us in that Washington State, the bigots did not get enough signatures for their anti-transgender.
Second year in a row.
Anti-transgender ballot initiative called Just Want Privacy.
They're trying to repeal the gender identity and expression non-discrimination law in Washington State because they can't just let things be. Well, it's not as if this has caused earthquakes in Washington State.
They needed 260,000 signatures. They said they got 240. You really need 500,000 to really cover it, and they didn't come close.
In California, on the other hand, the legislature there passed a law to mandate employer training on gender issues and the non-discrimination laws for any employer who has at least 50 employees. And that is now starting as part of sexual harassment training.
Remember how I told you about Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama? They started a discussion group on LGBT issues. It's a Baptist school. But they said, we got to talk about it at least. But this upset the Baptist conference there. And this school is willing to forego $3 million in funds from the Baptist conference in order to go forward with this just discussion group.
Fabulous.
Can't we talk?
Fabulous. A couple of deaths this week. We celebrate the life of Sheila Michaels, 78 years old, who wound up on the front page of the New York Times this week when she died, as the person who made the term Ms. routine. And
she popularized it.
Yeah.
It had been kicking around for 100 years, I think, in one form or another. But I think her roommate got an envelope addressed to Ms. somebody, and she said, what the hell is this? And this is in the early 60s.
Yep.
And it didn't even catch on the feminist community right away. But it became the title of your magazine.
I worked on the first issue of Ms. Magazine and wrote for them thereafter. And I remember the debates over the use of Ms., and some people thought it was hideous, and it was a big fight.
Yeah, we don't know a lot about Sheila's sexuality. She did have a husband at one point, but she was also a longtime member of Congregation Beth Simchat Torah, the LGBT synagogue in New York.
She also was a cab driver, a Japanese restaurateur,
She was
big civil rights organizer.
Yes.
And the New York Times in the obituary admitted that they didn't start using the term until 1986.
I know.
1986.
That's when it wasn't until then that they started calling us gay. Gay.
God. And in New Orleans this week, a prominent and beloved lesbian rapper, Brittany Johnson, 29 years old, shot dead. At home, her girlfriend was also shot, and it's unclear whether this was some domestic dispute or whatever. The girlfriend survived, but Brittany is dead.
But Donald Logue's transgender daughter is alive and has returned home. This is the Gotham star. His 16-year-old daughter returned home Saturday after being going missing. There was a nationwide search, and anyway.
Great news.
Lambda Legal is telling Puerto Rico that their anti-trans birth certificate policy is unconstitutional. They won't let you change your birth certificate there, so they're working on that. Okay.
International news. All Out says arrests of gay men have resumed in Chechnya, but the reports of the killings of a couple of dozen people,
27,
are not necessarily gay-related, according to the Russian LGBT network.
They put you to death for a lot of things there.
Absolutely.
In Chechnya. Okay.
In Iraq, in Baghdad, a prominent actor there, Karar Noshi, known as the Beauty King of Iraq, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed for being too effeminate. Not clear whether he was actually gay.
Basically for being stylish.
Yes, exactly. Long, lovely blonde hair. And he was just kidnapped off the streets and tortured and killed.
Well, let's give them some better news. I mean, New Zealand lawmakers have apologized for hundreds of convictions of sodomy over the years and the suffering that they brought to people. We haven't done we haven't done this in America yet.
Yeah. And they were convicted, of course, for consensual adult sex.
Yes.
Those convictions are going to be erased. In Estonia, 1,800 people marched peacefully at the first Pride celebration since 2007. 10 years ago at the last one, people trying to march were stoned and beaten, but this time it's all peaceful and nice.
In Germany, the upper house has passed the same-sex marriage bill that was passed in the lower house last week.
And they held the biggest Pride march in Europe, in Cologne, Germany. They also held a big Pride march in London, which included a woman proposing to her girlfriend who's a police officer.
That was nice. Yeah. And by the way, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, did a video on for Pride, and he referred to the LGBT plus community several times. This could be our new thing. LGBT plus.
Well, I wouldn't mind going to one word, but I can't figure out what it would be. Malta, as we're taping, is expected to approve same-sex marriage unanimously in their parliament.
Australia is getting close to it again because conservative members of parliament, who are called the Liberal Party, are talking about crossing the aisle and defying their leaders and voting for this.
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister is still threatening them and saying and holding firm to his, we want to plebiscite
the Prime Minister
vote.
Who is ostensibly for the bill.
But is held captive by the right wing that keeps him in office.
Well, you know, Angela Merkel got over it. Maybe you will too.
The Church of England held a synod and passed a resolution demanding an end to conversion therapy. They called it unethical and potentially harmful.
There's no place in the modern world for it.
And big scandal in Moscow, not Trump-related. There's a new ballet that's been created,
Yes.
a biography of Nureyev, and it's very, very, very gay.
At the Bolshoi.
It's now been postponed. So.
Are we going to pick at the Bolshoi when they come here next week?
Oh, God.
All right.
The official line is, it's not ready.
Yeah.
It's a mess. The unofficial line is, it is too gay.
It is very gay.
Yeah.
Cast of more than 100.
Yeah, but they also quoted someone who seems to be pro-gay or even gay who said, no, I saw it, it really isn't ready.
All right.
But that doesn't mean the government isn't working on censoring it.
A Tour de France cyclist, Philippa York, has come out as transgender.
That would be a retired Tour de France cyclist.
Yes.
And in Japan, 5 local assembly members in Tokyo who are LGBT, one of whom just came out in the midst of this announcement, have established a league to protect LGBT rights, and they've been joined by 78 other assembly members as supporters. So this is a new big coalition in Tokyo politics to protect LGBT rights.
So the Holy Father is enraged. I mean, he wasn't enraged that he was coddling a guy who coddled molesters, Cardinal Pell, who returned to Australia to face charges. But the Vatican police raided a drug-fueled gay sex party at the apartment of an aide to one of his key advisors. So there was this big thing, and a lot of it was due to drugs. But my favorite line in the story is, gay sex isn't illegal in Vatican City. So they didn't arrest them for that. Gay sex is the norm in Vatican City.
Oh, my. AIDS news. We spent half an hour with Dimitri, but a couple other things we want to tell you about. Oh, you mentioned the Rise and Resist demo at David Koch's house around healthcare. So a couple of events I want to alert you to next week. Wednesday, July 19th, the ACT UP Crystal Meth Working Group in New York is holding Focus Crystal Meth 2, a discussion from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. That's Wednesday, July 19th at the LGBT Center. And it's going to investigate a lot of unorthodox therapies for crystal meth addiction. It sounds very interesting, including Dana Beale's favorite, Ibogaine.
Go ahead.
At the Museum of the City of New York on Thursday, the 20th at 6:30 p.m., Chronicling a Crisis, writers on the history of HIV/AIDS. Ann Tedeschi, formerly of ACT UP, David France, How to Survive a Plague, Tim Murphy of Gays Against Guns, who's written Christadora and New York Magazine for many years.
Yes.
And you can also still see the exhibit there, AIDS at Home, Art and Everyday Activism.
Now, after going through all that on AIDS with Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, we would not want to discourage anyone from getting on PrEP, but we do want Gilead to get with the program. They've got some people within the company, whistleblowers, who are alleging that they were making part of their Truvada at a Chinese firm, saying it was from South Korea, and there were problems with this.
On the cheap, yes, and found a lot of contaminants in it.
Aren't you making enough money? Do you have to resort to things like this?
Now, this was a few years ago, so let's hope that they're no longer doing that. But originally the case was thrown out, and now it's been reinstated.
Yes.
All right, moving on to entertainment news.
The L Word is coming back.
We hope.
It's a new version of the lesbian drama. It last aired in 2009.
But a lot of the old people are still attached.
And
Eileen
they're
Chaikin,
old now. Well, all right.
Eileen Chaikin, who produced it and has gone on to produce Empire and a lot of other things, is coming back. Jennifer Beals, who says, we need this program again. There's so much going on. She's been totally politicized by playing a lesbian.
Good. I hope so.
So she wants it back. Leisha Haley, who played Alice, and everyone's heartthrob, Kate Manning, who played Shane, is attached to this revival.
Well, and the question is Andrew Garfield, who is starring in the National Theater production of Angels in America, what's his story? He says, as far as I know, I'm not a gay man. Maybe I'll have an awakening later in my life. It would be, which I'm sure will be wonderful. I mean, he was being interviewed on the stage of the National Theater. He started to say these things. People get very upset about these things.
I get upset about these things.
Anyway, he says his performance is devoted to my gay to my friends in the gay community,
Okay.
as it is to those who passed during the epidemic.
I just want to reinforce my recommendation of the TV show I Am Jazz. I've continued to watch this, and it is so moving and so smart and so real.
About the young transgender girl.
Now the discussion is about options for bottom surgery. And vaginoplasties and what's going to work and what isn't, and how hormone suppressants make for a reduced penis that then make it difficult to create a vagina. I mean, this is going on television with a teenager.
How old is Jazz now?
I believe tonight's episode has her turning 16.
Wow, sweet 16.
So and her social anxiety about dating, it's a really powerful, important show, and I really recommend it.
And I wish I could recommend Marvin's Room on Broadway. It was, this is a play by Scott McPherson. It's a play about caregiving and end-of-life issues. He wrote it in 1990, died of AIDS 2 years later.
Some people see it as a metaphor for AIDS.
Yep, and here the leads are Lily Taylor, Jean Garofalo, and a young guy named Jack DeFalco, who's pretty good, and Celia Weston as the dying Marvin's sister. But it's an intimate sitcom-y script that doesn't really hold up on a big stage. Sorry. If you have tickets.
Jenji Cohen, creator of Orange is the New Black, says she might end it after season 7. On the other hand, she might not, so don't freak out about that yet. My predecessor in this chair, Lee Sharmat, is involved.
This was back in the 20th century.
A long time ago. Is involved with the Cherry Grove Archives on Fire Island, and every year they do an annual exhibition of old, really historic photos and events and things. So that's coming up this weekend in Cherry Grove at the Community House Pavilion, Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 4. Oldies but Goodies, it's called.
Do you know LCD Sound System's Gavin Newsom?
No, but I know the story.
Has come out as transgender.
Good for her.
Gavin, yes. She will continue to use the name Gavin.
I'm going to say I told you so, because I have been touting, as regular viewers of this show know, the television program Claws on TNT about a nail salon in Central Florida starring Niecy Nash. And when I tell this to people, they look at me like I have 3 heads.
Well,
and they say, Ann, really?
You're a very discerning viewer.
That? Well, here's how discerning I am. I opened up the New Yorker last week, and Pulitzer Prize-winning TV critic Emily Nussbaum is raving about Claws.
I remember when the New Yorker literally said, the New Yorker does not recognize television. They didn't. They would not review television shows.
They've had a TV critic for a long time. Nancy Franklin for many, many years.
Well, I'm talking about 60s, 70s.
Yeah, well, that's a long time ago.
Okay, it's an old magazine.
Yeah, well, times have changed. But Emily Nussbaum is their new, current TV critic, and she loves Claws. And so does New York Magazine, which put it on its approval matrix as lowbrow, brilliant, and called it bonkers.
And speaking of old, how do you like the new place that Sage is building for us in the Bronx and Brooklyn? They're building these high-rise buildings that are supposed to be housing for LGBT people and allies. I mean, these things are tough because you can't ask someone. You
cannot segregate.
Anybody who applies, has to equally be able to get in,
Well, and they have the John Anderson houses in Philadelphia, which were built to be LGBT friendly and filled up, but not with all LGBT people, and they've had a little conflict.
They do make special efforts to, recruit them in the community centers and things like that. But of course, we live in a naturally occurring retirement community.
London Terrace?
Yes.
Okay.
Now they all know where we are. Thanks for being with us.
It wasn't a secret.
Dimitri, for being with us, and we'll see you next week, and thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.